Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from Silicon Valley again. We are with another excited Mind Chat here at Mind Bridge. And today we have the pleasure to have with us Mike Kim, the head of Google for Startups, APAC. Hi, Mike. Welcome.
Hey, Marco. Thank you so much for having me this morning. It's a pleasure.
My pleasure. And I'm glad to address the topic of the day because this is one of the first deep dives that we're hosting on the Korean ecosystem. So we're really excited about that. That goes in a conversation that is an extension of our activities that we're hosting in Korea these next few weeks. And what we call the Scale Up Summit. We're also issuing some interesting new reports on the Korean ecosystem, and the idea is to have Mike with us is also to reinforce some of the insights from your perspective. So very excited about that.
Fantastic.
So Mike, let's start with your background. You have a very interesting international background, and I would like to cover what brought you to Google for Startups.
Sure. So I guess start from the beginning. Born and raised in the Bay Area and have lived there all my life. So went to school in California, studied political science and communications, and actually never thought I'd be in tech. But growing up in the Bay Area, when I graduated, it was such a boom time for startups. So it was so exciting. And so my first job was at a startup. It was at a small gaming company at the time called Zynga. And I'm sure many of you, if you had played a Facebook game, we had created hits like Farmville. And so that kind of got my start into startups. I absolutely fell in love with the growth, excitement, and I went eventually from Zynga to many other companies. One of the places that I really feel like I grew was at LinkedIn, where I got to really help them expand their business globally. And I was in charge of business development for the profile product, which everyone has. And that really helped me learn about the global nature of companies and how we can help companies expand. And that eventually got my interest in Korea. And I never actually thought I'd end up going abroad because I was born and raised in the States and grew up in the Bay Area all my life. But my passion for startups at that point had grown. I'd been in the Valley for 11, 12 years. And I got a call from a very small company at the time in Korea called Pedare Minjok. And at the time, they were a small food delivery company. They had about 20, 30 folks. And I remember going out to Seoul in summer of 2014. And, the CEO took a walk around the lake with me. And he said, if you're interested, we'd love to have you. And I was pretty hesitant because I'd only been to Korea a few times. I couldn't speak Korean very fluently, but I just fell in love with his vision and passion for what he wanted to build. And, fast forward, it's now a unicorn in Korea. They were just acquired by a massive conglomerate in Germany. And that eventually led me to wanting to stay in Asia and got the offer from Google for Startups to basically not just help Korean startups, but to nurture founders from all across Asia, which is a huge passion of mine. So that's how I ended up where I am now.
Awesome. And we're going to talk about Google for Startups in a second. Here is the landing page of Google for Startups, a bunch of interesting activities happening there. There's also something that evolved over time. I remember still in my time at Google, there was under different umbrellas, the initial Google for Entrepreneurs, and a lot of interesting stuff that was getting started initially. Before we move there, what is your connection with Korea? Is that both parents?
So my parents both immigrated from Korea. The rest of my extended family still lives in Korea. So aunts, family, grandparents, and so it's a really special place because I only associate it with family. And so all my life I'd only go back because of family. And so I never thought of it as a business place. I never thought of it as a place for my career. It was just a place to go visit my family and to catch up and to connect with my roots. But now it's become, a huge chapter of my life, much larger than I thought. And to be honest with you, I don't see myself coming back. Now I see myself in Asia for the long haul, and especially Korea. That's a country I want to continue to be in.
And I was watching your opening of one of the events. So can you share what is you're also the founder of the Korea Legacy
Yeah.
Committee?
Yeah, so thank you for asking. The Korea Legacy Committee is my charity organization. And I also think not only do we have to, help build the startup ecosystem, but when you live in a particular community, I believe it's also important to be a part of it and to give back to it. And so Korea has, unfortunately, the highest level of elderly poverty in the world. Almost 1 out of 2 elderly senior citizens live below the poverty line. So my charity organization, which we started 6 years ago, every weekend, every Saturday morning, we feed around 300 to 400 elderly. And so we create and package these meals. We call doshirap, which is the Korean term for lunchbox. And then Saturday morning, we go out with young people. One of our biggest goals is empowering young leaders in Korea. And so we have college students who come out with us. And then we distribute the meals every Saturday morning. And this is what I consider more of a, not really a charity organization. I consider it a movement because it's about getting young people empowered in the country to give back. And it's, I think it goes along with the work that I do at Google for Startups as well, which is not just about building great companies. It's about building, inspiring young people to want to invest in their countries and to give back. And so one where we're doing that is with the Korea Legacy Committee. So thank you for asking.
No, I think it's a fantastic endeavor, and I applaud you for that. And I think it's part of, when I speak for myself now, when initially I started Mind the Bridge was from a very similar call. In my case, actually spent, my first 20 years of my life in Italy, and everything was there. But then when you start looking back, really the idea of legacies and roots is something that shapes you in different forms, and then it's up to us to decide how do you want to feel connected to that, and whether or not we feel a call for action. And so I think right. in your case, I found it extremely interesting and in an area that I wasn't aware of. So really very interesting, the work that you're doing there. So I recommend and suggest the listeners to check out. Is there a website that they can look at?
Yes, KoreaLegacy.com. And we are open to anyone volunteering. So I always encourage, if you're ever in Seoul, all you have to do is go to KoreaLegacy.com, and then you can sign up for volunteering. You can donate. One of our mantras is to be incredibly inclusive. So you don't have to speak Korean. We have a lot of visitors who just come to Korea, want to give back, and you're more than welcome to just pop in and volunteer with us.
Fantastic. And here we're looking at, we're seeing now some of the videos.
Programs. This is the meals we serve, and these are our volunteers, all young people. And, I'm really proud of them because it's early mornings, but they come out, they cook, they clean, they serve. And, I think in the end, we always get more out of it than the seniors. And the college students will say the same thing. They come out, they're pretty tired in the morning, but then 3 hours later, they will come to me and say, that experience, really changed my life. We didn't think it was going to be like that. And it's very rewarding process.
Fantastic. Good. So back to Google for Startups. So give us a little bit of insights for people that are not too familiar with Google for Startups. I mean, Google, an ex-startups would say that, accelerating the growth in the last 20 years, but it still, I think, feels and shares the world of a startup to some extent. The activities in integration with startups have been in multiple areas. And so help us kind of order all the different areas where there is integration between Google and startups. And I think Google for Startups is probably the main and most visible platform, but there's plenty more. So help us organize.
Yeah, so in a nutshell, the easy way I describe it is Google for Startups is the kind of gateway into how Google supports entrepreneurs around the world. And Google for Startups does that. One of the things, if we go back, is that Google itself was a startup. And the way this team was formed was that the founders, Larry and Sergey, said, how do we give back? We have so many great resources. We want there to be more Googles. We want there to be more entrepreneurs in the world. And so this team was created to take the best of Google resources, whether that's our product support, our talent that we have, the mentorship, and to distribute that around the world. And we do that in a couple of ways. One is we have campuses. These are physical hubs that we have around the world. These are completely open spaces where entrepreneurs can come in at any time, work, participate in a program, get training, get mentorship from Googlers completely for free. We have 7 around the world. In Asia, currently, we have one in Seoul and we have one in Tokyo. And these are places that if you're ever in Seoul or Tokyo and you need a place to work, you want to connect with other like-minded entrepreneurs, you can just pop into one. Unfortunately, because of the pandemic, we've been closed, but we are looking into reopening, hopefully in the second half of the year. It's really depending on how the nature of the pandemic continues, but that's one way we give back is the campuses. Number 2, we have programs all over the world, and these are open. For instance, we have programs called Startup School, where we take particular Google products like Cloud or TensorFlow, and we will provide trainings and learnings for entrepreneurs at free. And so they can pop in, hear from an actual engineer on their questions. If you have questions around YouTube, we'll get speakers, executives from YouTube to speak about the product and how to best utilize it. And so we have a range of ways we support entrepreneurs, but really each country has its own specific way because each ecosystem is so different. And that's what I really, really love is that each team that we have in the countries are specifically working on the problems for that particular ecosystem. And that's why the programs will also meld to that.
There we go. Now here we're looking at on the landing page and all the different campuses and some of the joint activities that you guys share there. What was the history of Google for Startups? Can you, because was known with Google for Entrepreneurs at a certain moment in time, was connected to GV.
Yeah, it was. I love that you remember that. So when I first started, the team was Google for Entrepreneurs, GFE, and when the team started, I think about 8 to 10 years ago, and it was founded by an incredible employee at the time named Mary Grove, who had been a long time
good friend.
Okay, yeah, she's amazing. So she was a longtime Googler and a lawyer and was very close to the founders. And she had been in Google for so long, and her true passion outside of law was supporting entrepreneurs. And so this started as essentially a startup within Google. She kind of, slowly built the team and slowly built these campuses. But it really fell in line with the vision what the founders wanted, which was, hey, we started in a garage. There are probably thousands of other people right now starting in a garage. We have the privilege of being able to help them and the resources. Why don't we do it? And so that's also how I came in. I met Mary Grove and was just so floored by her passion for supporting others and her vision. And so she built the team from scratch, and it really still feels like a startup. I know people won't believe that, but we're in a big company, but this team is very scrappy. We're still actively, agile, and we eventually changed the name as well from GFE, Google for Entrepreneurs, to Google for Startups. And we just thought it was more of a global name to use the term startup than entrepreneur, but the same team and same vision.
Awesome. And now Mary is off to a lot of extra good work in the world of entrepreneurship. So Google for Startups, let's talk about some of the programs that you guys run specifically. As an ex-Googler, I know everything is run by KPIs and numbers, the OKRs at Google. What are the measurable objectives of at large of Google for Startups? What do you count? The number of startups that you engage, the impact, what can you measure?
So it's really around impact. So how many people train? So a good example is we just launched a program in APAC called Women Founders Academy. And so one of our biggest pillars or core pillars is supporting women founders or those who are usually underserved, and that could be different for each region. Recently, we just launched Women Founders Academy. So it's the number of mentorship hours, number of startups trained, and we also think about what kind of products and learnings that they want. And so it's not just about the hard skills like, engineering training or digital training, but also soft skills like leadership, being able to pitch, setting OKRs. And so it's a range of things that we do, but our true KPI, the way we measure ourselves, is the true impact on the ecosystem. Are we supporting founders getting funding? How many hours have we served to mentor them? How many programs are we running in a year? How many people have come through a campus? I know that's changed now because of the pandemic, but you could tell that our metrics are really around leaving a lasting impact on the ecosystem.
And this is the landing page just for the activities in Korea. We're going to talk about some of the details there, but there you can, if you scroll down, you can see some of the programs that you've been running as the one for specifically for female entrepreneurs. It's definitely something that is needed around the world, not necessarily just in Korea. So give us some of the range of number of startups that you are impacting on a global basis, just also to understand the size of the activities and maybe the number of programs.
Yeah, so it really ranges. I would say our programs are broken down into kind of two types. One is really high touch programs where we go really deep with a small number of startups. So an example of this is one of our academies. We have, for instance, Cloud Academy, where we will, for instance, in Seoul, we will pick around 10 to 12 startups and we really go deep for 12 weeks just on cloud. And so that's a small cohort where we go really deep and they get one-on-one catered support. I love programs like that. But we also have regional programs. So a good example of that is Startup School. Startup School is open to any entrepreneur in Asia. And that's also, I think it was a 10-week program where every week we had a different topic, whether it was cloud, YouTube, maps, how to use our APIs, leadership, sales training, how to use our ad products. And those programs can reach thousands of people. So, it really depends on the program that we run. But some we go really deep with catered support, and some we just do regional wide where, we'll have a program like this online and you'll see hundreds or thousands of people coming in. And it just shows you the interest that people have on Google products, but also they are yearning for that Q&A. They have a lot of questions. And it's great to be able to provide that platform for them.
So I know there are other areas where there are specific outreach activities for startups at Google, especially in the area of development, DevOps. So, start to nurture the developers, in particular if there are also co-founders. Can you maybe give us some hints of other areas of resources for startups? And I know that historically you guys also run a number of different accelerators, startup accelerators. Would that fall under the Google for Startups umbrella or at a different ownership?
Yeah, that's a great question. We also run a set of accelerators around the world. We do have numerous teams within Google that work with startups, but the accelerators are also something that our team runs in collaboration with our developer relations team. And currently in Asia, we have accelerators in Tokyo, Southeast Asia, and India. And hopefully we'll continue to launch more accelerators. The accelerators have become incredibly popular. And so we want to be able to launch more throughout Asia and more around the world. But that's another really popular program that we run. And stay tuned for more updates, because I think in the second half of the year, we'll have some exciting updates in Asia.
And just a highlight on the accelerators. I know that there are all different shapes and forms. Some that are actually very international, so where you ask also founders to travel to different ecosystems. But what is the value proposition for a startup? Do they also receive some seed funding, or is more of a support, hands-on support, and the scaling of their products?
Yeah, so no funding from the accelerators, but I could say this, that once a startup is selected and put into the cohort of our accelerators, it really catches the interest of VCs in that particular region, or even globally. And I think that there's kind of there's a stamp of approval there where the accelerator comes into the program. We're really focused on helping them build their product and really scale and grow. And they're using our products anyway when they come into the program. So it's really, how can we accelerate their growth? How do we make sure that they have no challenges as they build and grow? And then when we have a graduation at the end of each cohort, we invite investors and VCs. And it's been exciting to see investors get so They ask a lot of questions, they go deep, but they're also highly engaged with the startups that come out of our accelerators, which is a huge plus for the founders, and they enjoy that.
Yeah, definitely the vetting from Google still has a very strong value. Excellent. So let's talk about Korea, the South Korean growing ecosystem, and I'm going to mention a few of the data that we have been gathering. Now it's been the second years that we've been issuing our tech scale-up reports, and I can share some of the figures there. But the bottom line, it is pretty clear that this South Korea ecosystem is facing a strong growth, and the growth is driven by a number of different factors. But it's definitely more of a concentration of growth scale startups. So there is the layer of education that is becoming massive, also through some government support. But then finally, you're starting seeing that out of this funnel, there's more and more scale-ups. And some of those, I mean, you were just mentioning your professional experience that you joined one of them. So let's start from your feeling about the ecosystem as a whole. Has that changed in the last 5-10 years from your perspective?
Definitely. Having grown up in the Bay Area and starting my career in Silicon Valley, that was kind of my benchmark in a sense. And then I moved to Korea and, worked there for about 5.5, 6 years, and it blew my mind. In some ways, I would have to say, I think the ecosystem is much more developed in a sense in Korea. I think that there are three main things that goes into a healthy ecosystem. And one is just basic infrastructure, getting around, office space, being able to be highly connected. And so if you think about Korea, you've been there. There's not a place that you cannot be connected. You can be on the top of Bukhansan Mountain and you'll have 5G.
Actually, way better than Silicon Valley, to be honest.
Way better. Way better. You can be, 100 feet underground in a subway, and there are probably 1,000 people in one train car. They're all streaming a Korean drama. It doesn't glitch once. You have a very connected city, so the infrastructure is just there. Number two, talent. It has one of the highest educated populations in the world. Math, science at a very high level. So you have an incredible talent pool. And more and more when you look at this young generation, you see a generation that also studied abroad, has a much more of a global mind. And so you have not only infrastructure now, but you have a great talent pool to pull from. And then number three, I think in general, you just have to have an entrepreneurial culture. In Korea, for maybe those who are watching this that don't know much about the Korean history and culture, it is entrepreneurial. It is very entrepreneurial. Korea came out of a war about 70, 80 years ago, and a lot of the parents that we have now started businesses. It may not be an IT business, but that blood or that history of starting businesses is very natural in Korea. And so you have a young generation now that has a highly connected society with great infrastructure, great educational programs, institutions, and you have this culture that drives people to want to build great things. Also, because the country is small in a sense, 50 million people, from the get-go, young Koreans are thinking globally. In America, I think people, a good example is I joke with my team, in America, we don't have in startup conferences people saying, "Hey, how do we go global?" It's just people we don't have meetings around that in the Silicon Valley. It's just assumed, or we assume we're building products for America. And where in Korea, it's always talking about how do we go global and how do we expand beyond our borders. And I think it's natural because the country is smaller, but it's also very cool to see that from day one they're thinking about building something for the world, and I think that's very exciting.
And in this very point, I can testify that we've been supporting the Korean ecosystem for the last probably 8 years, and we're seeing definitely an improvement in number one, in the level of international exposure that in particular the young generation has. It's just language sometimes, but and not just the language and the reference that I have, right, in terms of what matters to us. And number two is really the focus of this international mind as a result. So start companies that can be global for a day zero, and that's essentially part of our roles. Is we're one of the platforms helping them develop a global relationship and improvement at an international scale. So that's definitely something that we've seen from pretty close by. What is the role of government there? Because that's definitely one big difference now, where we're looking at different ecosystems and growing ecosystems. Constantly, the Korean government, in plural, so over the years, placed entrepreneurship and support of startups, and even the creation of unicorns as one of the measurable objectives and KPIs of a government, which is probably one of the few countries around the world that do that. So can you share from the inside how important is that?
It's very important, and I think they've done a great job. They've really put startups at the forefront of their agenda, and they've really invested heavily in building the ecosystem. Not only have they invested or created funds to support VCs and investments into startups, they've also created numerous startup spaces across the country. And so if you go, and you can see it's not just concentrated in Seoul. Even if you go to the outskirts of Seoul, Pangyo, different areas, they're really making investments. I just went down to Busan, which is the second largest city in Korea. It's at the very southern tip of the country. And even when I went there a couple of weeks ago, you had startup centers all over there, and it was full with entrepreneurs. And so you can see by region, by city within Korea alone, the government has really made a push to support entrepreneurs, support them young. So meaning that they encourage college students to be able to take entrepreneurial classes. You've seen them create funds so that VCs can take pools of money and then invest that into startups. And so I actually feel that the government right now is really putting startups at the forefront. And that's great. It's a great tailwind for all of us to ride. And it's nice to have a government that is wanting entrepreneurs. They want startups. They're not opposing it. They're not stopping growth. And that's a great thing.
And as I said before, I think some of it is education. And so as you mentioned, some are support from really on the classes and universities and programs on entrepreneurship that is becoming like the norm. And some of it is now more on the scaling. So really focusing and having KPIs on how many companies from that funnel are starting, not just getting created, but are able just to start growing in scale, which is something that really Silicon Valley is number one at, right? So the natural acceleration and scaling of those resources. But I'm seeing, again, this is from our study, even from last year, that a number of companies that get in our case, we have different terminology. We call it the scalers and the super scalers, based on the amount of money they are raising, $100 million or the $1 billion. And so there's actually, cash in a bank. It's not just an evaluation. The concentration of those is increasing dramatically. And now in that rankings among different developed economies, Korea just surpassed Germany, that historically has been also a larger really factory of R&D and startups in general. So that's particularly exciting, right? The focus on the scale. Maybe some insights as when you worked in one of the unicorns. Give us a little bit more of the experience there. How fast did it grow? Where was the funding coming from? Is that something that you see more replicable in these days?
The scale was fast. When I first joined the company, it was January 2015. We had around, I think, 60 folks that time. Within a year and a half, I think we had gotten to around close to 1,500 to nearly 2,000 people. It was quite large. And to your question, the investments were from abroad, and that's a great thing. I think it just shows you that there is that much international interest. So one of the major early rounds that we got was from Goldman Sachs. And then I remember supporting the next round we got from Hill House Capital, which is a major PE firm based out of, at the time, Hong Kong. And so it just shows you that there wasn't Korean investors interested in the Korean market. There was global interest. And I've only seen that grow in the past 6 years, which is you have a lot of international investors realizing and recognizing that this is a highly developed ecosystem with really smart entrepreneurs. And when something blows up in Korea and becomes popular, it overnight it changes. Koreans adopt very quickly. You can see even some of the senior citizens have blogs. They all have smartphones. This is a highly connected society. So when something hits, it really hits. And so you look at 배달의 민족. You go to every city in the country, and you order fried chicken. They're using that app. There's not 5 companies they can choose from. There's one, and I think that just shows you that when people really fall in love with a product, they really fall in love. Just like Kakao, it's the one app they use to message their friends and family, and if you really hit it, you hit scale quite quickly.
Yeah, and it's definitely, clear that digitization of the country is massive as compared to any developed economies. And now that if you travel in the last year, as in the COVID era, everything is tracked and works perfectly, and everybody is actually aligned with that. But I'm glad that you actually mentioned the flow of capital, because that's another one of the highlights that we got from our report, is the fact that it's the one country where, as you said, the majority of capital is flowing from abroad. So yes, government support has created appetite, but now it's purely down to business, and we've seen a lot of capital flowing from US, but also from the region, also from Japan, for example, directly into local funds. And then I think that creation of scale is being producing now the future tech giants. So we see the Coupang down, in the e-commerce world, that a massive IPO. We'll have the Kakao of the world in the financial in the bank, but not only, Kakao is everywhere now. So it's definitely interesting to see how that scale now is at really comparable to the global tech giants that typically Silicon Valley is being producing.
Yeah, I think it's a sign of a very healthy ecosystem when you have not just domestic dollars, but you have foreign dollars coming in. It means you have people really looking into the ecosystem, validating it, and wanting to put money into it. Also, I think that's a great opportunity, as we talked earlier, about companies going global. So you have investors who are global coming in, and they will also be able to build bridges for that particular company to be able to expand. You see a lot of startup companies going into Southeast Asia. And so you have, it's a very nice symbiotic relationship between international investors wanting to invest in Korean entrepreneurs, but also knowing that when you invest in a Korean entrepreneur, you're investing in a global company, because it's not just going to be a company that's operating in Korea. They have ambitions to be able to serve different markets all throughout Asia, North Asia, Southeast Asia, or even the West. And so I think it's a very good sign. The government kind of sparked the fire and got things going, and now you see other people piling in the wood chips, and it's nice to see this fire continue to grow.
And you have a global role there with in the region, and so you're familiar with other major ecosystem with Japan or Singapore, where your headquarters are. What's the peculiarity of the Korean market? So where is the Korean market different, and whether is that from different verticals and different industries where it excels, or just more in the opportunities in the flow? How does that compare to the other, for example, major hubs like Singapore and Japan?
I think one is just, it's incredibly innovative and forward thinking. And also I think the culture is very 빨리, so fast. So a good example is, I think one of the areas or verticals that I think Korea really excels in is e-commerce. So, having grown up in the Bay Area, you order a Domino's pizza, it takes you 45 minutes and you're happy with that. In Korea, you order something, it's in your house 15 minutes later. If it's 20 minutes, people are upset. They think that's slow.
Regardless of the traffic of Seoul, that actually can be brutal.
Traffic in Seoul is brutal, and yet you're going to get your thing in 15 minutes. But to have that means there's a very well-developed infrastructure that allows people to get the products they want, from hand phone to the e-commerce platform to payments, to be able to get that to your front door, whether it's raw fish that was caught that morning and in an icebox to your dinner plate that night. Or, there's a great example of, you're going to go play baseball with your son the next day. You don't have a baseball mitt. You order it that night, and then the next morning it's in front of your house. So in terms of infrastructure for e-commerce, highly developed compared to, I think, other countries. And also it's the culture. People expect that. And I look at, I come back to the States and I see people excited about, Amazon Prime, and they're getting ready for that. Well, that kind of culture was already established in Korea decades ago. Also, because of that, I think fintech and payments is also very advanced. So when you have a very developed e-commerce platform, you have different methods of payment. You see companies like Toss, which just became another unicorn, grow very quickly. And so you see the fintech side of startups in Korea also developing, because when you have a highly developed e-commerce platform where people are so used to making payments online, you have a whole new ecosystem then of startups that need to facilitate that, whether it's a payment gateway, making sure there's online banking, that there's security. And so now you see a whole ecosystem of startups just building along that line. And so it's exciting to see companies like People Fund, Finda, Toss, all in the fintech space, just growing rapidly.
And here is the last area where I would like to pick your mind, is the ability now of the Korean ecosystem to attract also hubs of innovation from different global corporates. And that's another thing we're tracking in our report, is something that is growing increasingly in size and also in representation, also in all different industries. Is there a reason you think why this is also becoming a hub that attracts global corporates just to get closer to what's shaking locally?
Yeah. So are you asking about just how to get international talent to come into the country?
That's one opportunity, but what we're tracking is basically the outpost of global, Fortune 500 companies that are putting one hub specifically focused on innovation locally in Korea. That's definitely a testimony of the fact that the ecosystem is growing fast and people want to get closer, and at a very early stage of tracking opportunities, or maybe sometimes that's in a few industry also, to be able to connect with talent that is closer to research and R&D.
Yeah, I think the more inflow of international companies and making Seoul a hub or Korea a hub is going to continue to grow. Since I'm based in Singapore, and I've seen how that really supports bringing international talent into a country, is to have more and more of those hubs developed in your city. I think Seoul has a lot to offer, and I think when it comes to the things we had talked about, when it comes to talent, infrastructure, and a country that is devoted to developing great entrepreneurs, for international companies thinking about launching a hub, Seoul is definitely a place to put that there for not just Korea, but having a hub in Korea means you're connected and gateway to Asia, and I think that's an important thing for the future. And so I hope that continues to grow. And what my vision though is I really want more international talent to continue to come into the country. That means we have to work on immigration policies and making sure that we allow great talent to come in. I think one of the things that what made Silicon Valley so special is, you sit at a meeting table and you have someone from India, Japan, Mexico, Germany sitting with you at the same table, and that diversity of thought, that diversity of people challenging each other creates the best products. And I think that's why Silicon Valley companies have done so well. And I hope moving in the future, Korea also, when I sit down at a table there, we have international talent working on great challenges and building great products. And I think moving forward, we will see that.
And Mike, I think this is a perfect ending, a call for a diversity and international flow of talent in South Korea. So we appreciate your thoughts and sharing. And thanks, Mike. Keep up with a good work. Take care.
Thank you for having me.
Bye.
Bye, Marco.